Hello, hello. I'm going to get right into this, although saying that, I'm going to still have a little preamble. Before I read from a poem by William Butler Yeats, I will say that this is very much connected to another video I've done. I don't think it's going to really matter whether you listen to this one first or the other one. The other video is going to be titled Along the Lines of From Cradle to Grave, and the journey from youth to old age, from beauty, if you have it when you're young, to, well, perhaps wisdom, if you can acquire it, or any of it. Now, although this is a preamble, I'm likely to have some, in fact, I'm certain to have some interludes, some deviations. There'll be incidents and accidents, and like Paul Simon said in his song, which I'm pretty much riffing off, there's even going to be some hints and allegations of, an upsetting or distasteful nature. But let's try and be adults about this and not allow ourselves to be consumed by an idea just because we are presented with it. And that, I think, I can't remember now whether it was Aristotle or Plato, or maybe it was Socrates. I'm going to guess Aristotle said that it's the mark of something, let's say, educated mind, that he's able to examine an idea without being overtaken by it or overwhelmed by it. Something along those lines, anyway. Now, straight away you might understand where the tricky points are going to be, especially that in this day and age, they've made so many things impossible to discuss that we have to talk about them guardedly. So first of all, I'll just tell you outright the name of this poem by William Butler Yeats. And it's called Among School Children. And some context is needed, because you might go, what? What's he doing among school children? Among school children? Was he a teacher? No. What was he doing there then? Was he at a parent-teacher meeting? No. Well, the answer was this poet, William Butler Yeats, who was known, I think, still as what's known as an Anglo-Irish poet, which means that he was sort of half English, sort of half Irish. I think this may have been referring to the fact that he was of the Protestant religion, which means that he was of a religion that was typically more likely to be Church of England type of Protestantism, just like there's Lutheranism and Calvinism and that kind of thing. It's one of the Protestant religions. Now, I remember when I was a kid, I will have this little deviation before I get into it, I suppose. I asked, like all the time, well, apparently Catholics and Protestants don't like each other very much, or, they even have been warring for centuries about their differences in religion. So, first thing I wanted to know, like everything else, like, why is this, why is that, why? What's the big deal? What's the big difference between them? Tell me, why are they fighting so much, killing each other for centuries? Well, there must be a very big difference. And I looked into it, and the only two big differences that anybody could ever tell me was transubstantiation, and whether the mother of Jesus, Mary, whether she's a saint, or whether she's just a very nice holy woman, or whether she is a god or deified, as some Catholics do, that they practically make her part of the Trinity, rather than who, let's say, I don't know, either the Holy Spirit gets kicked out or Jesus himself gets subordinated. I don't know exactly how it works, and nobody is willing to actually nail to the cross, let's go with that, state definitively what it is that they believe. Nail their colours to the mast is probably better. But that's what they're arguing about, which seems very... nobody disagrees that she was the mother of Jesus Christ, whether they're Protestant or Catholic. So what's the big deal there? Nobody can explain to me why that's such a big deal, really. It's just important, and you need to accept it, like so many other things. And the other thing, transubstantiation, it means when they have the Mass, which is more likely what Catholics call it, or a church service, which is more likely what Protestants call it. They have all this slightly different terminology. It's basically splitting hairs, It's madness. It's just what Dean Jonathan Swift wrote in Gulliver's Travels about the fierce wars amongst the Lilliputians, about which end of the egg to crack open first, and having endless wars about it. It is that stupid. And yet on it goes for centuries. And I always said to my parents, but why were people so stupid in the past? Oh, well, people were silly, people weren't sophisticated, they weren't educated enough, they were, either too unenlightened or they were over-enlightened and they were sure of their ideas, but not like us now, where everything's peace and calm and war is over and we're all just working together for a better world. And of course, as many of you know, nothing is further from the truth. Well, this has turned into a preamble, of course, isn't it? But look, I guess maybe this will be... Look, anybody could tell you about this poem, right? But maybe nobody could meander about it in exactly the same way as I do. So just to finish off transubstantiation, when the Catholics or the Catholic priests hold up the chalice with the wine in it, or hold up the piece of wafer, the wafer thin wafer, and then they have an altar boy ring the bell, and the priest mumbles some words to himself. Even though they won't really quite state it, they'll hum and haw about it. But I mean, we're supposed to believe that, I say we, but Catholics are supposed to believe that when he holds the wine up in this golden chalice, and when he holds the wafer up, that it literally, not figuratively or not symbolically, but literally becomes the flesh and blood of the body of Christ. And I've pressed them on this as a little boy. I was 4, 5, 6 years old. I was 11, 12 years old, 13 even, but I kind of gave up after that and just went, right, listen, you're all just... I know you're liars, because you never keep to the same story one day after the other. And when I ask you, so it's such a common familiar type of trait nowadays, isn't it? When I ask them to be definitive about it, what do you really believe? Is it symbolic? Or do you really believe that it has mutated into actual flesh, while at the same time still looking and feeling, tasting, smelling and touching exactly like wafer and exactly like wine? So how does that illusion work? Or how does that magic trick work? Or how does that miracle work? Oh, well, you must understand, it's more of a symbolism type thing. But you said it was actually the one main difference between you and Protestantism. Well, you see, I think we all know now that the only real difference is they're arguing over who gets to be in charge of the flock. Okay, so how do I find my way back now to among school children? And how did I get out on this? Well, I suppose I got distracted immediately by what is an Anglo-Irish poet. So he's half English, half Irish, one foot in either country. But however, he was apparently fiercely nationalistic as far as it went to the Irish side of things, or the Celtic side of things, the mythology, the folklore, and in addition to that, the right to self-governance, determination, mixed in with the mythology. So the past, the present, and the future into some kind of glorious rebirth, perhaps, of a Celtic Gaelic culture. And the woman he very much loved, called Maude Gonne, I'd better get her name out right away, which is what this poem is pretty much about. She was also, I think, their love was around this idea of Irish nationalism, but also sort of a romantic idealism about what that might mean, what it did mean in the past and what it does mean now. And their present now was perhaps the 1920s, 1930s, but also really from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. So let's say the time span is more like 1870 even, up till 1930, 1940, kinda. Now, I said I wasn't going to have a preamble, but there it is. Can I get into the poem? Yes, I think so. Okay, so he was a poet, but this poem was written when he was an elder statesman. So he was a long-suffering poet, but now, for whatever reason, after the sort of revolution, as they call it, of 1916, and then what they call the Irish Free State, which I think was 1921, 1922, where it was kind of established, where there was some kind of home rule, as they called it, for Ireland. He was a senator. His duties, or part of his function, was some kind of official inspector of schools through the Department of Education for whatever fledgling independent Irish state there was there. When I say independent, I mean either independent of Britain or of the United Kingdom or of the British Empire. All those three things. But it was really an illusion, I would say. Just like, American independence, you could say, was really an illusion. Or maybe it did happen, but it was short-lived. And I think there's parallels there. It's all very confusing, murky, and I think deliberately so. All right, so let's say the start of this poem anyway. He's walking into this school in Waterford in County Waterford in Ireland, which is both a city and a county in the south east of the county or the island of Ireland. It is perhaps best known for its crystal glassware. Maybe it's also known for Huguenots and emigrants to Newfoundland and Canada, Labrador, maybe that coastline anyway. Oh God, could I get back to this? But it does need a bit of a more setting up. So he's being accompanied by a nun who ran this, maybe she was the headmistress or mother superior of her order, and her order was the Sisters of Mercy, which was always a beautiful type of misnomer, an oxymoron, because I have heard and met and spoken to and known some girls and women who were educated by the Sisters of Mercy, and they would say, well, they were more like twisted sisters. It was always incredible to me, why, now not all, but why were so many priests not very nice men, and why were so many nuns not holy and pious, but vicious and spiteful? And I won't get into a story now. This is already too long to be self-indulgent, but I am personally aware from a very young age of how violent and vicious nuns could be, and it wasn't the violence towards me that upset me so much, but the incongruity of it all, the inability to understand why it was coming from such a source, when I would have believed and was led to believe that should be the last place anything like that should come from. Anyway, he was being accompanied by this Mother Superior, or the head nun, the headmistress of this school run by the Sisters of Mercy, and she was showing him around, and no doubt giving him some pleasant smiles, and he was giving her some pleasant smiles, and she was saying, now I'll show you these perhaps children in, I guess you would call it elementary school. I don't really remember what we called it. Maybe we did call it elementary, but I remember we called, when we were sort of 4, 5 or 6, all boys and girls pretty much went to these kind of convent schools. Boys only up until the age of 6 or 7, and then they went to their own schools typically, and then girls stayed in that school. So there were children typically there in mixed groups of boys and girls from the ages of 4 till 7, and that's mostly probably what it's still like. And so the little tots, we called it low babies and high babies, and we thought we were very old when we were in high babies, and then first class, as we called it. But I know that doesn't translate all around the world. In any case, I think I'm now ready to start the poem. So he's with this nun, and he says, I walk through the long schoolroom, questioning. A kind old nun in a white hood replies. The children learn to cipher and to sing. They're not coding, they're writing cursive or handwriting. To study reading, books and history. To cut and sew, to be neat in everything, in the best modern way. And I remind you, this is the 1920s, I think 1926. So when we're talking modern, every generation thinks it's modern. So the first quarter of the 1900s thought they were modern. And we're now in the first quarter of the 21st century. And we think we're postmodern or post-postmodern. So she says, in the best modern way. And then the children's eyes, in momentary wonder, stare upon a 60-year-old smiling public man, because he was the senator and inspector of the schools.